The Dick Morris Show. Entertaining and informative. On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Hi, welcome to the Dick Morris and Doug DePiro Show.
Hello, Dick
Sponsored
Morris.
by the Patriot Gold Group. Sometimes there's a song that captures a news item better than words can. And this one by the Fifth Dimension, I think, fits that bill. It's hard to believe the good economic news that came out this week, but it clearly shows that Trump is absolutely doing very well. The critics who've raised doubts and concerns and fears can calm down because he's basically doing everything right and everything is going well. Imports are way down, 46% down, unbelievable in 1 month. There is almost no inflation. There's almost no unemployment. Personal incomes are rising. So what else is new? Any reason to be upset? Any reason not to think things are going great?
Yeah, it's been raining out for 2 days, and I'm working outside doing a mural.
The U.S. goods trade deficit declined sharply in April from a record in March as the effects of President Trump's tariffs faded. According to advance estimates from the Census Bureau, the goods trade gap plummeted 46% from $88 billion to $88 billion from the all-time high of $162 billion just last month. So in 1 month, the amount we import from other countries has dropped from $162 billion to $88 billion. Normally, the only reason your imports drop is you have a recession and nobody can afford to buy goods from abroad. But that's not the case now. It's unbelievable. This was the smallest trade deficit since December of 23. While economists had anticipated a substantial slowdown, last month's reading came in much better than the consensus forecast of $141 billion. So we imported about $60 billion less in April than we did in March. Unbelievable.
It's a beautiful
and
thing.
While that was going on, all the other indications are incredibly positive. And it's hard to second-guess that. It's hard to say anything that Trump is doing is not right. At the same time that all of this was happening, inflation was dropping. That's right, dropping. And, it's almost impossible to see this kind of positive momentum and at the same time see less inflation. Incredible. Less inflation, less unemployment.
Wait, explain that. I think I know that, but let me hear that.
The classical thing is that when people can't get hired and they're unemployed, the economy is worse, and you can't you can't do that. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we have had a tremendous growth in the economy and no inflation is absolutely incredible.
Amazing.
In the last month, imports of goods from other countries dropped 20% in 1 month, and exports of goods rose by 3%. Leading up to the president's sweeping global tariff plans on April 2nd, companies apparently rushed to stockpile consumer goods to avoid the anticipated tariffs,
right?
Just like we want them to. Declining imports are expected to bolster the GDP growth rate in the current quarter, which shocked everybody by being down by 0.2% last month. But everybody said that was just because exports increased, and that was just a temporary phenomenon. Now it looks like exports are going to increase and imports decrease. The Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta said that they anticipate a 3.7% growth rate in April through June. That's up from the 2.2% they had previously thought would happen. And according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, personal spending rose 0.2% in April in 1 month. And while this is happening, inflation fell from 2.1% in April to 2.3%, from 2.3% in March to 2.1% in April. And the consumer price index over the year fell from an annual rate of 3% to 2.3%. So what's there to criticize? More economic growth, fewer imports, positive balance of trade, inflation down, and how about personal income? Americans' personal income in the first 4 months of this year is almost triple the expectations, making for a great start of the year. CNBC's Rick Santelli exclaimed on the air, urging viewers to give credit to the Trump administration. The longtime CNBC editor revealed the powerful numbers on Friday morning, sharing that personal income increased 0.8% in April, almost a 1% growth in personal income in 1 month. They're powerful numbers. Up 6.6 in January, up 0.7 in February, up 0.5 last month, and up 0.8 this month. This is a great 4-month start to the year. So there had been you constantly read the stories, and they're constantly saying, oh, things are okay now, but when Trump's policies take effect, disaster is looming.
Well, of course they're going to say that.
Well, now they've taken effect, and the triumph is unbelievable. And the result is apparent in the polling. Trump's job approval rose to 50%, which is much higher than it's ever been. And when they ask people, is America on the right track or the wrong track, 50% say America is finally on the right track. 50%. Rasmussen said in 20 years, the percent of people who say the U.S. is headed in the right direction has never been as high as it is today. Mark Mitchell himself, the pollster, said, never thought I would see it. He's been tracking this question since 2006, so he knows a thing or two. Just unbelievable.
And then we got McLaughlin coming up soon.
We do, who is the pollster, and Trump's pollster, and he'll give us perspective on this. But one of the things that McLaughlin did, and which he'll talk about,
and he's a really nice guy,
is that he asked people, is it true that while you may not agree with everything Trump and his MAGA movement do you believe the president is putting America first as he resets the national agenda? And 2/3 of Americans agreed with that, and 61% of Democrats agreed with that. So this change in the country's economy looks like it's triggering a massive change in public opinion. This is the first time we've seen the real result of Trump's actual in growth. By 61 to 28, voters said they agreed that the president is putting America first as he resets the national agenda. The actual question was, while I may not agree with everything that Donald Trump and the MAGA movement says and stands for, I think they're right about putting America first, putting America and the American people first.
This is the Democrats saying that.
Well, this is a question, and then the Democrats agreed with that.
Yeah.
So it's incredible what's going on. The Beatles had some thoughts about that. So as we approach the midterm elections, the Democrats, the people who voted for Biden, are increasingly saying that Donald Trump is doing a good job on the economy, and we're increasingly admitting that.
And when you say people that voted for Biden, you mean the people that voted for Harris also.
Harris, yeah, right.
Same thing.
Yeah, it's just incredible. So we're going to have John McLaughlin on in a few minutes, and when we get back, we'll talk about the trade deals with China.
The Dick Morris Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. This National Foster Care Month, Marine Toys for Tots is providing hope to children who need it most. Staff Sergeant James Caldwell, who grew up in foster care himself, shares that while handing out gifts at a Toys for Tots distribution event, a little girl looked up at him, reached into her bag, pulled out a stuffed animal and said, "Someone needs to make sure you get a toy too." That simple gesture embodies the heart of Marine Toys for Tots, ensuring every child, including those in foster care, experiences the kindness that can transform their future. Visit toysfortots.org today.
If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
The Dick Morris Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Hi, welcome back to the Dick Morris and Doug DePiro Show, sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group. Well, I just rattled off some economic statistics that are unbelievable. Almost a 50% cut in imports into the United States because of the tariffs. Great growth in personal income, likelihood that the economy expanded by 0.8% this quarter. Personal income rose by 0.8%. Most likely the economy expanded by 4%. Inflation is at one of its lowest points in history. And when we put all that together and we poll people, we see the responses are really off the chart. So to explain that, I've asked John McLaughlin, my good friend and Trump's pollster, to explain what's going on. Hi, John.
Hey, John.
Hello, Dick. Hello, Doug.
Hey, man.
By the way, I heard you guys were at the White House this week.
Oh, it was great. I just got to tell you a quick story, John. So Dick calls the president. We're in a meeting with this guy. It was fantastic, the idea he had. So Dick calls the president about 6 o'clock. We're at dinner. And after he gets a couple phone calls, he finally gets them. And he says, "Mr. President, please, if I can have 5 minutes of your time, I have this guy and blah, 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 all this stuff," right? And the president goes, "Wow, that's a great idea. Call my guy, send it to my guy." And Dick goes, "No, please, Mr. President, I really would like to see you for 5 minutes." He goes, "Dick, I'm busy." He goes, "But just give me 5 minutes." He goes, "You know, Dick, I am the president of the United States." The way he said it.
Well, I not only got the 5 minutes, I got 20 minutes.
Yeah, it was great.
So, John, you asked this incredible question in your poll that is so important. The one about, even if you don't agree with everything that Trump is doing, what do you think? Do you think that he has the American people's interest at heart? Why don't you read the text of the question and what your results are?
Right. Well, and by the way, it was a brand new poll. We were in the field May 21st to 26th, and we gave him the statement, "While I may not agree with everything that Donald Trump and the MAGA movement says and stands for, I think they are right about putting America and the American people first." And they agree, 66-28. And you've got, what's interesting about it is Democrats 42% agree, liberals 37% agree, and Harris voters 38% agree.
Wow.
So not only do you have a unanimous Republican base, there's a lot of Democrats and independents and liberals who think that the country's been taken advantage of. We got to put ourselves first. And Dick, you already covered in your opening of the show about how the president's good policies are making good politics for us. Where policies, when they succeed, they move numbers. Like last December, we had the country on the right direction, 24-66 wrong track. Well, you remember, like when you introduced me to Trump when Obama was president, Trump was thinking of running against Obama, 2/3 of the voters thought the country was on the wrong track. With Joe Biden, 2/3 of the country thought it was on the wrong track. And Donald Trump was giving them specific policy solutions. And now, in our poll, we've had a positive move of 36 points where it's 42 right direction, only 48 wrong track. Huge shift. Republicans are the generic for Congress because we took the poll right after the House passed the tax cuts, which still have to get through the Senate. the Republicans' generic vote, they gained 2 points, 47-43. We have Trump's approval at 51, his disapproval only at 44.
Did I get that right? 51?
Right.
You and I have not seen a 5 in Trump's ratings in our entire career of polling for him.
That's not true. He had it on Election Day, and he had it in January around the inaugural.
Okay.
And those were his highest. And by the way, we ask it a little differently. We say, do you approve of both Trump and his policies? And you've got 38% saying that. Or do you approve of just his policies? 13%, that gives you the 51. Or do you disapprove of both? That's the 44. And that's the strategy, remember, during the campaign,
right,
how we were able to lift his job approval, would lift his favorables, so that at the end of the campaign, we're grinding up in the polls, and Trump's going to McDonald's serving food because Kamala Harris said she did, but she never did that. And Trump's going out. They called us garbage. Trump's going out with a garbage truck to his rally with a yellow vest on. And it's like his but his job, because they were willing, the contrast of the job that Trump did as president versus the really bad job that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were doing, lifted his favorable, so we won the popular vote 50-48. So we got 50% of the popular, and that's what stunned people, that on election night the media had to call us a winner because they were in shock. But that's what lifted it up. That's what the strategy was. And you're seeing it now in his policies where, people, there's some tough things out there like tariffs where they're saying, that they think they help more than they hurt, 48-37, but in the meantime, his when we polled on his tax cuts, people want the tax cuts made permanent, and we have it 64-20. They want to make it permanent.
That's great.
And you got 71% want the no tax on tips.
You remember my talk about Frank Perdue, John?
Yes.
Yeah, I call that the Frank Perdue strategy. Frank Perdue, you may recall, is a chicken magnate who his ad slogan was, "It takes a tough man to make a tender chicken." And the strategy we thought about was to make clear that only a Donald Trump could handle Washington. Nice guys finish last there. And you need somebody with a tough personality and aggressive and pugnacious to be able to tame Washington. And only Donald Trump can do that. So rather than convince people he was a nice guy and a sweet guy and a guy he'd love to go fishing with, instead it convinced them of the truth, which is that he's a tough SOB who stands his ground, who insists that his position is right, and insists that until he prevails, which he almost always does. And I call that the Frank Perdue theory.
And as he said, Dick, before he was in, he said, first of all, the 4 years that he lost just now was great because he now knows who the people are that are going to go at him, the right people to choose and use. So that was important also.
But you're seeing the Frank Perdue theory at work here, that you don't have to go around saying you're Mr. Nice Guy.
Right.
You can, in effect, almost say the opposite and still eventually get their votes. And it's much more credible to say that than to say you were wrong about Trump. He's really a nice, sweet guy.
Well, I always said, when people said, can you ask them to, simmer down? I said, you wouldn't ask General Patton to calm down in the war, right? He just wouldn't do it. That's Trump.
Yeah.
Patton.
Exactly. Well, John, go ahead.
I think there is a certain style and there's a certain sense of humor to him that, he did have the highest rated primetime TV show, Celebrity Apprentice, which is why he didn't run against Obama. He wasn't ready to leave the show. But he does, there's a quality to him that if you do get the tough business guy, but on the other hand, he's somebody who's very patriotic, he's very loyal, and the America First is really what that defines all his values. And he's, there's things he does for people that you never hear about. Like when a policeman's killed on the job or something, he'll just send a check. He'll do things and he'll reach out and make phone calls to people that you don't realize. But it's part of the America First personality where he puts his friends and his country first.
Absolutely. You look at the history of the phrase America First, And it comes from the isolationist period before World War II, when a group of Americans led by Charles Lindbergh, the famous pilot, objected to measures to stop Hitler and objected to increase America's defense and objected to reinstating the draft. And their movement was called America First, and it fell into disrepute, and those words were radioactive in the past. So when Trump said, "I'm embracing America First" as my slogan, I cringed. And I said, my God, do you know the history of this? But he defied the history, redefined the term,
Right.
and it's now the theme of his administration. And it's really working very, very well.
And he's
True.
nothing. Go on. I'm sorry, John. You go.
No, I was saying it's true. It's like it's totally his version of America First is totally different. They were talking about isolationism. He's
Right.
talking about, we're still the world's superpower, but we're going to take care of our friends. We want to keep the world at peace. We want growing economies, but we just don't want people taking advantage of us anymore.
Right.
So that's his America First, and it helps. He's really what he cares about is the heartland of the United States, the Sun Belt, the Rust Belt,
Yeah.
the people that are outside the Beltway that are working hard. He doesn't want them paying taxes to give free health care to illegal immigrants. He doesn't want, people to worry about their safety because the border's been invaded. So he, and he does want peace in Ukraine and Russia. He does want to see, Israel secure. He wants to make sure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. That's not isolationism. But it's certainly America First.
Yeah, it's,
And he's so different in person, isn't he, John? I mean, I've been with him many times, working with him in Mar-a-Lago and even at the Oval Office Wednesday. He's just so different in person than he is on TV. He's a different guy. Like even Bill Maher said it. He visited the White House, and he even said it.
You
Yeah.
guys got to stop watching CNN and MSNBC. That's why all that fake news. Don't go for that.
Oh, my God,
you see
it's
the
horrible.
genuine article. By the way, he's a New Yorker, and
That's it.
he has a New York sense of humor.
That's
A guy
right.
who's raised in Queens, who has gone through the toughness of New York's
Yeah.
business community. So his sense of humor, sometimes when he talks about things, and he likes to get a rise out of
I
people.
love it.
He'll do things like when he talks about running again for president in 2028. That's his kind of New York sense of humor to drive the liberal media crazy.
yeah.
Give him
Stick it
something.
to him.
Yeah.
Stick it to him.
Give him something to bitch about.
The progression, though, just as a polling person, to appreciate this, from the first stage, which is I agree with some of his positions on issues, but I don't like the guy, to the second stage, which is I agree with his positions on issues, but he'll never get it done. And then the next step is I agree with his positions on issues, and it looks like he's getting it done, but he's still a son of a gun. And
Right,
now
exactly.
it's finally I agree with his positions on issues. He is getting it done, and he still is not a nice guy, but I like him because of what he does. And he's going through those phases like a butterfly in metamorphosis. And I think it's wonderful to watch that.
I think he's a really nice guy.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, just don't cross him.
Yeah.
Well, that's like any New
That's
Yorker.
why. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate the perspective. And this was a neat bit of polling at the start of the campaign, actually in 2020. John and I decided that when we went beyond the normal question, which is do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of Donald Trump, we would then do a follow-up question, which is if they said an unfavorable view, we would say, what do you object to? What do you think of his positions on issues and his accomplishments? And we found that the people who said, I disapprove of him personally, flipped and approved of what he's done. And then we learned that they flipped and approved of his policies. And now we're seeing this all seeping through and increasingly becoming just a flat-out favorable opinion of Trump. And it's really a wonderful progression to watch.
Yep. And by the way, thank you, Dick, you're the one back in 2011 when Trump was taking run against President Obama. You're the one who connected us, and Fortunately, he made us look good. That he's proven our polls right.
Yeah,
So,
right. Yeah, well, that is the other incredible thing about Donald Trump. He doesn't follow the polls; he makes the polls.
Right.
no,
He shapes them. He creates them.
it's what I call probiotic polling. He does it by gut. So if his probiotics are good, the polls come out right. If his probiotics are bad, then we got to take the poll and go talk to him and see if we can adjust things. But it's probiotic polling. It's all by gut. So
That's a great. That's a
it's
great
worked.
line, John.
He always says, "Oh, I hate polls. I hate polls." And Dick's trying to get him. He goes, "Dick, you don't go to the bathroom without taking a poll."
He said that. Yeah.
He actually said that to him.
Well, thank you, John. This
Thanks,
was great.
John.
Thanks for being existing.
Thank you,
and
Dick. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks for helping the president.
All right, brother.
So, the nice, sweet, tractable, lovely, delightful Donald Trump we were just talking about is not on display in his relationships with China.
Yeah, because the fragile trade agreement between Trump and China is under a new strain. Beijing is dragging its feet on key provisions. The resumption of rare earth mineral exports. The Chinese government has slowed approvals of export licenses for critical material used in semiconductors, electric vehicles, and defense application. President Trump, first of all, it's pissing off President Trump and his trade team. The rare earth issue was a linchpin in the tariff truce deal. China's top executive envoy, Vice Premier Shi Li Feng, agreed at the last minute to restart export flows in exchange for a 90-day suspension of escalation tariffs. So both sides paused most of the trade penalties that they had imposed, briefly calming the global markets. But the detent may now be unraveling. President Trump accused Beijing of violating the terms of the deal. China perhaps, this is what Trump says, China perhaps, not surprisingly to some, has totally violated its agreement with us. The U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer echoed the charge, saying China is slow-rolling its obligations.
And Hank Williams had an interesting take on this.
That's funny. That's pretty funny. That's funny, Dick. You're a funny guy.
Thank you, Hank. That was a succinct analysis of Sino-American trade relations.
Well, yeah.
Trump,
So he wasn't happy.
no, it wasn't happy.
And I'm sure he wasn't that nice guy that we see all the time.
So Trump warned allies and Americans against using Huawei, Huawei.
Right.
That's the horrible company in China, really, of course, run by the government, that is promoting espionage and trying to sell software around the world so they can spy on people. And now the Commerce Department warned against the use of Huawei's artificial intelligence chips, a move Chinese officials interpreted as a hostile escalation. The journal reports the Chinese authorities responded by quietly turning the already burdensome process for granting export licenses, viewing the approval system itself as a strategic tool in the larger trade fight. U.S. officials have pushed back, insisting that the Huawei guidance was not a new policy, but a clarification of existing rules. American companies, particularly, especially automakers, have reportedly raised the alarm with the White House. If the rare earth supply disruption continues, some warned, production lines could face shutdowns similar to the pandemic era. Privately, some Trump officials had anticipated the risk. According to the journal, negotiators in Geneva acknowledged the possibility that Beijing could renege. Still, they hope the deal would hold long enough to set the stage for broader cooperation. Instead, tensions have escalated. The Trump administration has moved to tighten controls on high-tech exports to China, including jet components vital to the C919 passenger jet an aerospace project personally championed by Chinese President Xi Jinping and designed software used by Chinese chip firms. In a statement to the Journal, a spokesman for China's embassy criticized the U.S. for its abuse of export control measures and urged both sides to honor the Geneva Consensus. That's what always happens when they break the rules.
Right, they go to Geneva.
China also launched the administration also launched new investigations into the Chinese trade practices and floated possible new tariffs on pharmaceuticals and other strategic imports. And earlier this week, it began revoking student visas for Chinese nationals in U.S. universities, a move Beijing called politicized and discriminatory.
Isn't that too bad?
So there are consequences when you cheat on Donald Trump.
That's it. All right, we got to take a break. So when we get back, we're going to talk about the courts of the trade and Trump's tariffs, the whole thing. All right, when we get back.
The Dick Morris Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dick Morris Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Dick Morris.
Welcome back to the Dick Morris and Doug DePiro radio show, sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group.
Before we get going, Dick, I want to call out the number. The call-in number is 800-848-9222. 800-848, or like, as Lux likes to say, 9222. 800-848-9222. That's
9222 is WABC, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
But who knows how to do that, the letters anymore, because on your cell phone it doesn't work.
So,
all right, the federal Trump's tariffs, and the appellate court reinstates them. A three-judge, the Federal Court of International Trade, invalidated the bulk of Trump's tariff increases. The ruling that Trump's tariffs were taxes and controlled by Congress, not the president. A federal appeals court on Thursday temporarily paused that, a lower court ruling that struck it down, Trump's tariffs on the wide range of countries.
this was potentially a catastrophe
Could
for
have
Trump.
been. I remember you told me. Oh
Because
my God.
the Federal Court of International Trade, a court I've never heard of and
Right.
most people haven't heard of, and only has jurisdiction over trade issues and usually stays out of the line of fire, said that Trump's entire approach of higher tariffs was illegal, and because he did not get it passed by Congress. Now, if that decision had stuck, it would mean that Trump could not raise tariffs on other countries without getting the approval of both houses of Congress. And you know damn well the Senate would filibuster that, and he'd never get approval in the Senate, and he'd only have the House. And it was the linchpin of Trump's entire policy. You saw in the previous segment how we talked about how it's worked. There's a 46% drop in imports and a 1% increase in a month in personal income and a continuing decrease of 0.8% in inflation. And that's because of these tariffs. And the Federal Court of International Trade just ruled to invalidate that and saying none of these tariffs are going to stick.
But now the U.S. court is a temporary stay until further
The
notice.
appeals court, thank God they did.
Yeah, right.
In this
So now it's
decision-
going to go to the Supreme Court, correct? Is that where it goes now?
Yeah, well, it could. The Supreme Court could either take the case or refuse jurisdiction.
Well, wait. Well, once there's a stay, then who repeal? How does that?
If they refuse jurisdiction, the lower court decision in Trump's favor will stand.
Oh, okay.
The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit granted the government's request for an immediate administrative stay of the U.S. Court of International Trade, saying it is temporarily stayed until further notice, while this court considers the motion papers. On Wednesday, the trade court ruled that Trump had exceeded his authority by issuing sweeping tariffs under an emergency powers law, siding with plaintiffs in a lawsuit filed against the administration. Thank God they ruled as they did. Trump's entire policies are predicated on tariffs. And if they ruled them unconstitutional or illegal, it's like pulling the rug out from under Trump.
Yeah.
And would be very serious. First of all, we couldn't increase tariffs on other countries. Secondly, the flow of revenue into our country of tariff revenues that's now exceeding 50 billion a month would be eliminated, and other countries could do with us as they wish. So thank goodness the Circuit Court of Appeals reversed that decision.
Dick was shaking the other day when he heard this decision.
Yeah.
Like, "Ah."
Yeah, it's horrible. So go ahead, Doug.
So where are we now?
10.
We're at 10. So Trump cancels the Chinese student visas. I love this. Amid allegations that the Chinese students have infiltrated at least one American university to act as spies, Marco Rubio said visas for Chinese students are being revoked. Earlier this month, a published report alleged a web of Chinese espionage had been woven at Stanford University. Under President Trump's leadership, the U.S. State Department will work with the Department of Homeland Security to aggressively revoke visas for the Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields. That's what Rubio said. We will all...
The Chinese government, the Communist Party, will only approve a visa for a Chinese student to come to the United States and study here if the Chinese student agrees to commit espionage for China.
Or write a nice letter back to China. Oh, hi, how you doing? Here's what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And if they don't do that, they're not only in violation of the wishes of the Communist Party, they're actually in violation of the law. And when Rubio revokes their visa, that closes the whole thing down.
Yeah, and he said we'll also revives visa criteria to enhance scrutiny of all future visa applications.
And
from
let's
China.
remember that there are close to 500,000 Chinese students in the United States.
Really? 500,000 people?
Yep.
Wow.
And they're concentrated, obviously, in the sciences and the STEM fields.
Do we have that many in China, Americans in China?
No, we have almost none.
And they have 500,000 here?
Yeah. Who the hell wants to go to China?
First of all, yeah, where are you going to go
Yeah.
to the bathroom, first of all?
And what are you going to learn?
And I said bathroom.
Yeah, so there's no flow in the other direction, and the Chinese leadership loves to send their kids to college in the United States. It's kind of their goal.
Seems like a lot of countries do that, don't they?
But China more than any other.
Really?
We have twice as many students in the U.S. from China as we do from the next largest other country.
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah.
Really? It's like double.
And China has deliberately been planting their students in the United States.
What about Japan? What is do you know the number?
Some, but nothing on that order
Nothing
of
like-
magnitude.
Wow.
It's something like 500,000 Chinese and probably 100,000 Japanese. So it's a big deal. And the fact that Trump is putting this into play while he's doing the tariff negotiations is a very bold stroke and a very firm, very aggressive position that probably is going to produce results and force China to back down.
And he's ballsy, Trump, I got to say.
Really is.
He really is, man.
Incredible.
And such a nice guy in the Oval Office. He just sat there and said, so what do you think of this? And what do you think of that? He was so calm and right. He was looking up and it was just great. The guy is amazing. Then he gave us some presents on the way home.
Yeah, tell him about it.
We were all getting up to leave. We all, three of us. And hold on, guys. And he hands us these beautiful medallions. I think they're paperweights. They weigh like 10 pounds.
They're heavy, yeah.
They're really heavy. I think they're
You say paperweights, I say they can be thrown at people.
like the Chinese,
Yeah, right.
The thing, the star, right? Yeah, the ninja star, right? That's Japanese, right? So, and then I said to him, because I do a lot of work down at Mar-a-Lago, I said, as Dick and the other guy left, I said, Mr. President, listen, I can fix that thing down there. He goes, don't worry about it, Doug. I fixed it already. I go, and when we were first there, I was looking at all the portraits on of all the presidents in the Oval Office, and the one that hit me the most, I loved. It was my style, almost 100%. Was the Ronald Reagan painting, and I said to him, I go, I want to do. He goes, do what? I go, I want to do a portrait of you, just like that portrait. He goes, then do it. That was cool.
Right.
That doesn't mean you're really going to get it, but
No,
he said it.
you will.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
many times in Mar-a-Lago, he said, just do me a sketch. Let's see what it looks like.
Yeah.
So I don't take it as what it is, but
Right.
it was a beautiful thing.
You know, it was interesting to see the changes in the Oval Office from Bill
yeah.
Clinton's days, because that's when I was last there. And he's put gold all over the place, gilding. And it looks
Just like Mar-a-Lago.
Like Mar-a-Lago.
That's exactly the.
But it looks like a royal place.
And not overdone. It's done beautifully with nice taste. You know, he didn't overdo it. Like right away, people are going to say, "Oh, he overdid it with the." No, it's really done well.
Okay, when we come back, Trump scored a big win against the Pulitzer Prize board about this coverage of the Russiagate scandal.
The Dick Morris Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dick Morris Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Dick Morris and Doug DePiro Show, sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group. You know, there's a misconception in the way people look at the media. They think that the media is focused mainly on ratings and the size of their audience, because that determines who buys ads and how much they can charge for ads. But that really isn't true. The journalists are far more focused on the awards that they can get as individuals, because that strengthens their resume when they apply for another job. And ultimately, the current political environment has shown that increased ratings do not necessarily cause increased ad sales. CNN, for example, has lagged far behind Fox News and Newsmax in their audience and the reach of their audience, but yet their ad rates are higher, and CNN makes more money than the other stations do, basically because liberals control these companies.
And they don't want them to go bust.
And the liberals control the advertisers.
And they don't want them to go belly up. So
and they're liberal, and they only want the liberal companies to prevail, and they want the stations to continue to be leftist. Mm-hmm. So there's a competition for ratings, but beyond that, there's competition for prestige and for awards. And those awards, while they carry no cash value, are worth a great deal in career terms. And one of the big ones is the Pulitzer Prize Board. The most prestigious award you can get in journalism is a Pulitzer Prize. So Trump has been suing the Pulitzer Prize Board after Florida appellate court denied the motion to dispose of the proceedings until the president's out of office. In a major win in our powerful lawsuit against the Pulitzer Prize Board regarding illegal and defamatory award of their once highly respected prize to fake malicious stories on the Russia hoax, and for the failing New York Times and the Washington Compost, which is what he calls the newspaper, the Washington Post.
That's good.
The Florida appellate court viciously rejected the defendant's corrupt claim, their corrupt attempt to halt the case, Trump posted. Trump sued the Pulitzer Board in 2022, arguing that the board's statements were suggested reporting from the Washington Post and the New York Times concerning the claims of Russia collusion during his first term were malicious and false, considering Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe finding no evidence of collusion. These newspapers won the 2018 Pulitzer Prize for national reporting, which Trump demands should be rescinded. Earlier in the day, Florida's 4th District Circuit Court of Appeals rejected the board's argument to delay the lawsuit on claims it would raise constitutional concerns for any court to exercise direct control over Trump during his presidency. And good luck with trying to do that.
Yeah.
The Pulitzer Board claimed that allowing the case to move forward would be a violation of due process, considering that Trump has previously used presidential privilege to pause lawsuits against him. Trump said, "They won a Pulitzer Prize for totally incorrect reporting about the Russia hoax," Trump wrote after the decision was reached. "Now they admit it was a scam. Never happened, and their reporting was totally wrong. In fact, the exact opposite of the truth. They'll have to give back the award. They were awarded for false reporting, and we can't let that happen in the United States of America.
Good for him.
We are holding the fake news media responsible for their lies to the American people so that we can together make America great again." This is such a major assault against the corrupt media by taking away their Pulitzer Prizes. It's like in baseball taking away a World Series title.
Yeah, right.
And and the fact of the matter is that the major newspapers and the TV stations were totally irresponsible for 2 years in how they covered the Russia hoax. Instead of describing it as a hoax, instead of pointing out that it was based on flimsy intelligence, which could not be relied upon. And then when they heard that there were prostitutes who were with Trump in Moscow hotel, who he asked to pee on him, and that was the basis for a Pulitzer Prize to be awarded.
Oh, so horrible.
It was horrible, and Trump is now taking revenge and setting the record straight, and he's calling for revocation of these Pulitzer Prizes. Now, of course, when Trump filed this lawsuit, we did not know the full extent of the actual truth, that these lies about Trump and about his relationship with Moscow were created by a guy named Christopher Steele, who was a former spy who worked for
the Steele dossier.
And he wrote a dossier that was the basis of these news stories. And the dossier was a complete lie. It quoted stuff that never happened. I learned early that it was a complete lie because Michael Cohen, who was the vehicle for this lie, who was at that time before that counsel to the president,
right,
who wrote that the Steele report said that Michael Cohen had flown to Prague and had negotiated this deal with the prostitutes and everything else with Trump in Prague. And I called Michael Cohen, who I was friendly with back then, and I said, "Is this true? Have you ever been to Prague?" He said, "I've never been to Prague." And I said, "Does your passport reflect that?" And he said, "Yes." So then I called Trump and I said, Michael Cohen says that his passport shows that he's never been to Prague where these deals allegedly took place. And so Trump called Cohen. He said, "Is it true that you've never been to Prague and your passport shows that?" And he said, "Yeah, that's true." And Trump told Cohen, that's back when they were in speaking terms, "Come to meet with me right now and bring your passport. This is important, Michael." And when he walked into the office with Trump, he showed him the passport and he showed there was no stamp indicating that he'd ever been to Prague.
Sure.
So the whole basis of the Steele dossier, that this was all brokered in Prague, turned out to be a total lie, as did everything else in the Steele dossier. But undeterred, the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Washington Compost, as Trump called it, ran front-page stories, and the networks on TV all highlighted this investigation of Trump's collusion with the Russians to fix the U.S. election. And it was totally inaccurate. It was based on the lies in the Steele dossier. And but for the discrepancy in the passport, we might never have found that out. So I'm very glad that he sued the Pulitzer Board. They should be ashamed of themselves, and that prize should be revoked.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, when we were in the White House, we were there right after Judge Jeanine was sworn in as prosecutor for Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Is that what? So I wanted to say congratulations to that beautiful woman tough as nails, isn't she?
Yeah, it was so nice to see Janine walking out of the office.
I know.
As we were walking.
Like, we
in.
didn't know either. And Lomagino walked out, Marco Rubio, Pam Bondi. We got to say hello to everyone. It was beautiful.
Yeah,
it
it
was
was
so
great.
great, though, Judge Janine. She's amazing. She's going to kick some butt.
So when we come back, we'll take some calls and go through more news with you.
The Dick Morris Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dick Morris Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Hi, welcome back to the Dick Morris and Doug DePiro Show, sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group. Let's go to Alan from Hackensack.
Hello, Alan.
Hi, Alan. Alan?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, how are you doing? Thanks for calling in.
You're very welcome. I had spoken to you a couple of weeks ago. From my vantage point at Homeland Security, I just wanted to let you know 330,000 Indian students study in the United States, only 277,000 Chinese students. Japan, 14,000. So
Right.
by far and away, a quarter of half of them are from India and China.
Thanks.
Just,
When I
make
got
that
when I got your note, I checked the stats, and you're absolutely right. The number one country of origin for students in the U.S. is India at 331,000, and number two is China at 277,000. And to give you an idea how large those are, the number three country is South Korea at only 43,000. And you're right, the Japan number is de minimis. But the fact remains that there are 300,000 Chinese students studying in the United States. And to get approval for their visas to come here, they have to be willing to engage in espionage and have a duty to report intel to the Chinese operatives. And they're each interviewed.
How do we know
by-
that? How do you
by
actually know
the
that?
Chinese people who've told us that. And they said they were all interviewed by a Communist Party person. And they're checked up on. There are frequent other interviews.
Okay.
And to have 250,000 people who are basically, many of whom are spies in the United States, is really very, very dangerous. So I applaud Marco Rubio pulling those visas. And in fact, in my book, The Return, Donald Trump's big comeback in 2024, I talk about that.
No, Deliverance.
No, that's not written yet.
No.
And
I don't even know if that's the name, right?
Yes, it will be.
Okay.
And I talked about that there and the extent to which Chinese spying in the United States is conducted by students. And they overwhelmingly go into what are called the STEM fields, which are the science fields: science, technology, electronics, and math. And they're in those fields not to learn, not to advance their education, but to spy on the U.S.
Really?
Thank you, Alan. I really appreciate the
Thank you,
correction.
Alan. That was great.
Let's go to Joe on Long Island.
Hello, Joe.
Yes, hello. I just wanted to say that I'm sure you are too, getting fed up with these judges who just, act like they're a law unto themselves and think they have a blank check to interfere anywhere. So I don't have much confidence that the Supreme Court is going to rule in Trump's favor on this one. Do you think Congress will do something to rein them in?
Yes, I do, but I think that the more likely result is that in the history of the Supreme Court and the U.S. courts, when the courts are out of step with public opinion and in major disagreement with the American people, usually the judges themselves move to the, in this case, the right, and realign with public opinion. The best example of this was in the 1930s, when the court was constantly throwing out all of FDR's New Deal legislation and ruled all the key elements of his program unconstitutional. And it was so bad that FDR proposed packing the Supreme Court by appointing 6 new judges so that the 15 judges would rule on stuff, and he would have enough conservatives, enough liberals on the court to get his stuff approved. And the Senate, even though it was overwhelmingly controlled by the Democrats, rejected Roosevelt's move
to pack the court,
and said they were not going to approve that. But then, when that happened, almost the same day, one of the right-wing judges resigned, and then one after another, they all left the court, and their places were taken by liberal pro-Roosevelt judges that reversed most of the earlier opinions. And I think that's what's going to happen here. It's not clear how this process goes on, but judges kind of are a club, and they kind of have a consensus among themselves. And when 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 judges step out of line, they're usually brought back in line by their colleagues, not legally, but just in fact. The other possibility
it's like a taboo type of thing.
Yeah. The other possibility, which is also very likely, is that Congress will pass legislation.
I was just going to ask
in the courts.
No, I was going to ask you, let's say this tariff thing does fail, President Trump, that court wins. You think Congress would take over on this tariff
thing? They might, but
what I mean?
But the first resort,
I mean, it's close. What majority?
Well, the issue would be a filibuster.
No.
But that's not the most likely thing. The most likely thing is that the higher courts reverse the decision, as you just saw with this tariff thing.
Correct.
The Court on Trade ruled one way. And that's a 3-judge panel that focuses only on trade and tariffs.
That's an international court, right? Where are they?
No, it's American.
Oh.
But the jurisdiction is international. It's on U.S. trade activities.
Got it.
But the Circuit Court, which is the higher court, reversed that ruling. And I think you're going to see a lot of these rulings reversed on appeal. You have to realize that what the left is doing is they're court shopping. They're saying, I want to stop this program. I want to stop his deportations of illegal immigrants.
Like court shop. They're courting courts.
They are. And what they do is they say, okay, I need to find a district court judge from among the 400 in the country that will sign an order reversing this. And they work until they find somebody who's agreed to do it. And then they bring a case before that judge.
It's that simple, Dick, that they could do that? They could just look for the right court and go there?
They can. But what they probably can't do in the future and are doing now is that they are currently, when a district court makes a ruling, even though it can be reversed on appeal, until it is, it's holding and binding on all the other district courts in the country. So they pick a district court with a liberal judge. They go to him and they ask him to issue an injunction. He does. And then it's appealed to the other courts. And on appeal, it's reversed. But in the meantime, it's been law for a number of months. And the
How long did it take?
Couldn't proceed.
Since that international court went against the Trump
tariff.
That was how long? 3 days? A
3
week?
days, yeah.
It was like 3 days?
Yeah, because it was such an important decision.
Right.
But I think that what's going to happen is that Congress will enact a law, and I think it'll pass the Senate too, that says that when a district court makes a ruling, they cannot extend that ruling to the rest of the country. It only prevails within the district that the judge is sitting in. So if the judge in Massachusetts makes a ruling that a Trump program is illegal, that ruling only applies within his district, and in the rest of the United States, it does not apply. So
yeah,
what'll
but
happen?
The tariffs are international.
Yeah.
So I don't understand that.
Well, it would be ruled illegal. They would rule against that court. But I think that's going to pass, and I think that it will limit the ability of district courts to make national rulings. And with 400 district courts in the country, you can always find a liberal one to agree to almost anything.
Sure.
And what this will do, I think, is to stop those judges from applying their rulings now.
So what will Congress do? Tell me again exactly.
It'll say that if a district court rules the action of the federal government illegal, its ruling can only be binding within the district the judge represents.
Got it. Okay.
Which is 1/400th of the country.
Right.
Can't be in the rest of the country. Right. And that'll discourage these kinds of judge shoppings, because it'll be clear that no matter how good the ruling is from your point of view, it won't stick. And even in the initial instance, it won't stick. Not only on appeal, but because it exceeds the jurisdiction of the court. So I think that that's a key question, Joe. But I think that the Congress will rein that in. There are other things that they're urging Congress to do that I don't think they'll do. But I think they will limit the jurisdiction of district courts. But thanks for your call, Joe.
Thank you.
Let's go to Sandra in New Jersey.
Hi, Sandra.
Oh, hello. I'm on my way to Morristown to see Washington's headquarters museum.
Morristown.
Yeah. I'm excited to see the headquarters of Washington, the president. But
And
I
you know
love
what's funny,
our president.
Sandra?
What?
Right near
What?
Morristown is Clintonville. I go to see my mother out that way on 78. So Morristown and Clintonville. Oh, excuse me.
That's so funny. That's so funny. But the reason I called today is I love Donald Trump. He's the best president. He has our back. 88.6 seniors or older people are on medications, and we pay more than any other country in the world. And between Mehmet Oz, RFK, Donald Trump, and others, they're going to go to all these pharmaceutical companies, and we're going to end up paying the lowest, and others will pay a little more, and they call that equalizing. Look, Donald Trump loves to negotiate. He does that with the tariffs. He's going to do that now with the medications. We should love him. We should be so happy to have him, right?
We do.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And Trump has frequently, including earlier this week, talked to me about how important his drug pricing initiative is. He said at the Oval Office, he said, they tried to do this for many years. I passed it, and then the Biden administration reversed it. But we can't allow the drug companies to charge Americans more than they charge any other country. And that is now passed because he can do that with an executive order. The order basically says that you can't charge Medicaid or Medicare more than you charge the next lowest price in another country. Yeah. He can do that administratively, and he did. And I think you'll see a big impact in the reduction of costs. Initially, even if you're not on Medicaid or Medicare, the decrease will be felt because it'll have to be reflected in private consumption as well. So I think that's going to be one of Trump's really big accomplishments that is now set in motion. But thanks for your call, Sandra, as always. That's very important.
Thank you, Sandra.
So good. When we come back, we'll talk about more news and take more of your calls. Thank you.
The Dick Morris Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dick Morris Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Dick Morris and Doug DePiro Show, sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group. You know, Joe's question that he just asked about the runaway courts that are trying to force an end to deportations of foreign criminals and to rein in other aspects of Trump's policies is a very good one. But there's something important that's happening about that. The key reason that we have such a liberal court and so many crazy radical judges is because the American Bar Association, that is a pretty leftist group, has the statutory authority to advise on judicial appointments. Their advice does not always have to be followed, but it usually is. And conservative judges are usually blackballed by the Bar Association.
In what way?
Well, they say this guy isn't qualified, he lacks judicial temperament, his previous rulings suggest bias, all kinds of excuses that somehow only apply to conservatives, not to liberals. And that has two effects. Number one, it stops conservative judges from getting appointed. And number two, those lawyers who want to be judges work at slanting their resumes toward the left, so the Bar Association will approve of it. But the impact of these judges ruling in favor of the left and then getting promoted is enormous. Reba McEntire has some thoughts about that.
Well, great tune.
So, Attorney General Pam Bondi has ended the role of the American Bar Association, the ABA, in vetting people nominated by the president to serve as judges. This is a massive, massive thing.
She's pissing people off right now.
Bondi said in a May 29th missive to the ABA president that the association, quote, no longer functions as a fair arbiter of nominees' qualifications, and its ratings invariably and demonstrably favor nominations put forth by Democratic administrations. She said that the association has refused to fix the bias in its ratings process, and that the Department of Justice will stop directing nominees to provide waivers that let the ABA access non-public information on the nominees, including their bar records. Nominees will also neither respond to ABA surveys nor sit for interviews with the Bar Association, Bondi said.
I love this.
The American Bar Association has lost its way, and we do not believe it serves as a fair arbiter of judicial nominees, Bondi said. She said the DOJ will no longer give the ABA the access they've taken for granted. Wow. This is an incredible ruling by her. Unbelievable and very important. This will end the leftist bias of the courts, because the reason you have the bias is that the procedure for nominating judges gives priority to the left. And if you have leftists in the ABA recommending some people and turning down other people, and the administration is not willing to defy that, you end up with liberals on the court. And this move by Bondi completely restores balance in it and will end this. It'll take a little while for it to take full effect because a president may only appoint 70 to 100 district court judges in his term of the 400 that exist.
How many did you say? He would appoint how many?
But it's going to take a while, but it will end this discrimination. And it is so, so important.
Wow, it's so unbelievable. So Trump doubles steel tariffs. Check this out. President Trump announced Friday his administration would be doubling tariffs on steel imports from 25 to 50% during a visit to Pennsylvania as he focused on boosting the U.S. steel industry. We're going to bring it from 25 to 50% on steel into the United States of America, which we will even further secure the steel industry in the United States. That's what Trump said. The president's announcement came as a part of an event to tout what Trump called a blockbuster agreement between U.S. Steel and Japanese-owned Nippon Steel. We're here today to celebrate a blockbuster agreement that will ensure this famous American company stays an American company. That's what Trump said in his remarks from the factory in Allegheny County. We're going to have a great partner. And I have to tell you, Japan has been a tremendous friend of mine during my years as president. Trump has, in the early months of his second term, emphasized a push to bring back domestic manufacturing and jobs, largely through the aggressive use of tariffs. So it's going to work.
The story with steel is a fascinating one. When Japan basically became really competitive.
This is not the steel dossier.
Not the steel dossier.
Okay, good.
When the U.S. steel companies began to adjust to foreign competition, the Japanese used tariffs and all kinds of other devices to kill it off and to make sure that Japan became the dominant steel producer in the world. And the steel industry basically pivoted from the production of raw steel, pig iron, and unprocessed steel, to rolled steel that permitted it to have a whole variety of other uses. And because of the technical refitting of American steel companies, they became competitive and really able to end the Japanese domination of the global marketplace. But the discrimination against U.S. steel companies continued, and Trump has now moved aggressively to stop this. And that's one of the big reasons he carried Pennsylvania, because he really was determined to level the playing field and not to give Japan this huge advantage over the U.S. in steel production. And it is so nice to see Trump reinforcing that with the tariffs. By the way, when that stupid federal court said that Trump's tariffs were illegal, they exempted the steel tariff, and they said that there's a reason for that falls within the president's jurisdiction. So they spared that tariff, but now they're sparing them all.
You know, you wonder if this guy sleeps. If Trump ever sleeps,
Yeah,
I mean, he's
it's
constantly
amazing
doing
what he's
different
done.
things. And
Absolutely amazing.
so Biden ignored 65,000 cases of child abuse. Check this out. This is horrible. The flag cases, which were identified between 2021 and 2024, involved potential abuse, human trafficking, and sponsored fraud. Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley reported the backlog of reports were discovered as the Trump administration continues to evaluate the Biden era. And when I say Biden era, I don't mean his term. I mean he's an error, like he dropped the ball in sports. The Biden era immigration policies, particularly related to the release of unaccompanied children from HHS custody, which is Health Human Service, to adult sponsors in the United States. HHS documentation reviewed by Grassley revealed the scope of these issues. 56,000 reports flagged as concerns. 7,000 reports involving suspected human trafficking. 1,600 reports of suspected sponsored fraud. Despite the large number of reports, only 528 leads were formally referred to by HHS to federal law enforcement for investigation. Now, you tell me why that happened.
Well, you have kids that come into the United States illegally.
No, why only 528
Well,
leads
I'm
were-
explaining it.
Oh, okay,
Brought
thank
in illegally and smuggled into the United States.
Oh, God.
And then when they're here, the immigration judges have to decide who's going to take care of these kids. And the goal is not to keep them in federal custody because they didn't do anything wrong, they're children, but give them to private sponsors who agreed to take care of them. And it turns out that most of these private sponsors were abusing the kids, were trafficking them sexually, and were not worthy of that trust.
So there's no follow-up when they give these kids to somebody? They follow up to see
Yeah.
who these sponsors
Well,
are?
I don't know if there's a follow-up, but this report indicates that there are 57,000 children who were referred to people who shouldn't have this kind of a role. And 7,000 were human traffickers, and 2,000 there was sponsor fraud. So this is corruption in the courts, and there must be payoffs, there must be bribes for this to happen. Now,
This should be jail time, is what
yeah, it should be. Now,
horrible to do to children.
earlier in the year, I talked about a story that this begins to touch on about human trafficking of children. The Trump administration, Trump 1, instituted a policy to stop human trafficking of children sent to the United States. And the policy involved asking for identification and interviewing the children to make sure that they were not involved in human trafficking.
Right, I remember this.
And the courts that took effect under Trump and really cut the amount of human trafficking going on. But then when Biden came into office, he discontinued the program, and there was no longer any filter So there were these tens of thousands of children who were being trafficked.
Why would
with
he
the United
do
States
that?
helping
I don't
them do that.
understand these people.
Well, Biden was for immigration and wanted to encourage it.
What about
And-
for children and their safety?
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't
It was
care.
outrageous for this to happen.
Horrible.
But it happened, and it's nice to see that Trump is paying attention to it.
Right.
What I'm looking forward to is an order by him reinstating these tests.
Right.
Trump in the first administration ordered DNA screening of children brought into the United
Right,
States.
I remember that.
And what he was doing was when the child came in and said, "This is my mom and this is my dad," Trump said, "Prove it." And they were
Right.
tested for DNA.
Uh-huh.
And if they were not related to the adults, they were sent back and not admitted to the U.S.
You should remind him. We should remind
Yeah,
him
we
of
should.
this
I-
because he's so
this-
busy with stuff.
this
All we have to
story
do is remind him and he'll go, "Oh yeah," and
Yeah.
he'll do it the next day.
That's right. I think that's accurate. I think, and we'll follow it. I think he will
Right.
do that.
He will absolutely. He just needs to remember,
Yeah,
understand what happened
yeah.
because he is a
Absolutely.
great man like that.
So let's go to Eduardo in Tampa.
Eduardo. Hello, Eduardo.
Hey, Doug, Mr. Morris. Hey, I got a comment. I'm going to get into the Scripps thing here in a moment, but first I want to mention there was a stat that between 20 and 24-year-olds, there's a 9% unemployment, the stay-at-home sons. The Scripps, year after year, you have these immigrants, mostly from India, that win these things. And I was telling another show, their culture emphasizes, discipline, hard work and all that, and as opposed to our American laid back, lazy society, I think we should take a page from that culture, and I think we have a lot more,
Yes.
people
winning these races.
Well, yeah, but let's bear in mind that a lot of the policies of people not working and participation in the labor force has dropped significantly are federal benefits. And why should
COVID
they
had a
go
lot
to
to
work
do
when
with
they're
it.
getting all this money
Sure.
out of Washington? And there's a need to rein in those benefits, particularly food stamps and Medicaid. And Trump's big, beautiful bill that's now pending in the Senate
I think it's
does
big,
that.
badass bill.
Yeah, that's right. So go ahead, Eduardo. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, I think if young people had to do like 2 years of military service, that might be able to help.
Never happened. That's great.
Yeah,
Love
going
it.
to the trade, not this. I got to go to college. I think it's a waste of time to go into college. Go into the trade. If you get unemployed, you got a skill. You're going to be able to get money on the side because you have a skill. I think that's the way to go.
You're
Thank
right.
you. Thanks for your call,
And
Eduardo.
if you
Let's
listen
go
to
Rick
hold
Tuck.
on 1 second. If you listen to Charlie Kirk, who I listen to all the time, he goes to these colleges, and one of his main themes is college is a scam, a big scam that people get out of college and never use what they learned in college. They don't get a job based on what their college classes were about. Anyway, go on.
Let's go to Richard in Bayshore.
Hello, Richard.
Hi, Richard. Hi, Richard.
Hello, Richard.
Well, he says that Xi Jinping's daughter is at Harvard, which I did not know. Okay, so let's go to him.
Hey, Mike. How you doing, Mike?
Hi, guys. How are you? Good afternoon.
We're great.
I saw reports yesterday that Xi Jinping might be losing a grip on power, that there's some indications that the Communist Party elders are turning against him, and that youth group is beginning to go into the ascendancy again. It's resurging, the Communist Youth League. Have you heard the reports of that? And if that's the case, what's the implications from a strategic standpoint for the United States and our allies?
Oh, it means everything. It's very important. I can't tell if that story is accurate or not, but clearly you have to anticipate that at some point Xi Jinping loses his grip on power in China. I mean, how wrong can you get? He was wrong for his trade policies. He's wrong for lending out all that money in the Belt and Road Initiative, and clearly his policies are very destructive and he declared war in trade with the United States, which makes about as much sense as Pearl Harbor made. And he's going to likely pay the price for it. China's economy is a basket case, and China itself is a basket case. When they instituted the one-child policy in the 1970s and 80s to cut their population by only permitting families to have one child, it resulted in mass murder, mass abortions of female
They actually
children.
killed them after they were born? No.
Or abortions before they were born.
No, but after they were born?
They were,
God.
but also abortions during
Yeah, I know that.
during the pregnancy. And as a result, China's population has begun to really decrease. And it's projected that by the end of the century, there will be a larger population in the United States than in China. And China has had no economic growth in the last 2 years.
Yeah, but now they're buying friends.
Well, they're spending the money they can on trying to beef up their trade. The problem China has is that it has no domestic consumption. Only a third of everything made in China is bought by the Chinese. 2/3 is bought by foreigners. In the United States, this is the flip side. 2/3 is consumed by Americans, and only 1/3 is exported. So the Chinese economy is totally dependent on the export market. And when it loses that, as it's losing it with these Trump tariffs, it's in terrible economic condition. And I think that it's not going to be long before Xi Jinping is thrown out of office. I think it'll be a coup like the getting rid of Khrushchev was and bringing Brezhnev in. Where I think the hardline communists will back off and embrace some of the policies that Deng Xiaoping supported in the 1970s. And it's interesting to hear what you say about it. But, Mike, I heard that you also have read that Xi Jinping's daughter is enrolled at Harvard. Is that true?
That's correct.
Uh-huh. Well, that's incredible. And that puts into perspective Trump's ban on Chinese students and Rubio's revoking the visas of the ones that are here. I hope they revoke his daughter's visa, too.
Yeah, he'll feel it then.
Let's go to Shannon on Long Island.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon.
Oh, very informative show. I approve everything that Donald Trump has been doing, his agenda. However, I'm very upset, as are many Long Islanders, about the reversal of having those wind turbines pile drived into the ocean floor, the Atlantic Ocean. And it was because Kathy Hochul said he couldn't have the pipelines upstate, I think, if he didn't agree to that. Is there anything can be done to reverse this back? Because that was his original position.
I didn't know.
I don't know that, and I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
I will investigate that, though, and that seems that Trump is opposed to these offshore turbines.
I'm very surprised.
Let me check that out.
Yeah, we
Thank you
see
for
if that's a
calling
real
us.
story, Shannon.
Thank you for calling us, Shannon. Follow the show, and we'll give you that information. Thanks. Now, I have long said that the Democratic Party is moving way to the left, and that it's going to begin to lose every election in sight because of the left taking over the party. And there's more evidence of that coming up.
When we get back.
The Dick Morris Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dick Morris Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The history of American politics shows that when the left party, the Democrats, lose elections to the conservatives, to the Republicans, they do not move to the center in the next elections. They move further to the left, and it begins a series of election losses which, when they finally sink in, realize that they have to move to the center, but it takes a while to do it.
And then it's too late, right?
When Hubert Humphrey lost to Richard Nixon by the narrowest of margins in 1968, in 1972, the Democrats nominated George McGovern, the most leftist candidate they could find, and he was defeated badly by Richard Nixon. Then in 1980, when Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter for re-election, the Democrats responded by moving to the left again and nominating Walter Mondale and Mike Dukakis. Both of them were badly defeated. And now the Democrats are at such a flex point again. And I believe they're going to move to the left again, and I believe they're going to nominate AOC for president in 2028.
That's going to be great.
Representative Greg Cesar, Democrat of Texas, who's the chairman of the Progressive Congressional Caucus, says, quote, "The sky is the limit for AOC," and that she'll be making her own decisions about whether she stays in the House or runs for something else in the future. Fleetwood Mac had some advice for them. A poll just came out of Democrats asking who they would support for president as their party's nominee in 2028. Now, the number one person in the poll was Pete Buttigieg at 32%, which you'd expect because he ran before. Number two was AOC, who was at 16%. And then Gavin Newsom and all the others were in single digits.
Gavin Newsom.
And I think that Greg Cesar is right.
Great Caesar's Ghost from Perry White and Superman. Anyway, China, we were talking about China earlier, you know, what they're doing, their economy. But now they're buying friends. In 2020, House Foreign Affairs Committee report found that Chinese trade with the Caribbean reached $8 billion in 2019, an eightfold increase from 2002. Between 2005 and 2022, China invested more than $10 billion across 6 Caribbean countries, including $2.2 billion in Jamaica alone.
And let's hear what the Beach Boys have to say about that.
All right, so including $2.2 billion in Jamaica alone, in the Bahamas, Beijing has poured $3.4 billion into the Freeport Container Port, just 87 miles from Florida's coast. These investments are often packaged with the Belt and Road Initiative, China's sweeping global infrastructure program that now includes several Caribbean nations. The Belt and Road, basically China gives a ton of money, says to another country, oh, you need a bridge or you need this going on, and they give them, $2 billion. And then when the country can't repay them, they go, oh, we're going to take your rare earth minerals or whatever, you know.
And most of the time, the ruler they're dealing with in the foreign countries takes the Chinese money
and buys a house
and puts it in his Swiss bank account.
Yeah, right.
And it never gets spent on anything within the country.
Right, that's Belt and Road.
Yeah, Belt and Road refers to the old Silk Road. That was the import route that Marco Polo used to get Chinese products to the West. And the Belt and Road refers to the Silk Road historically.
It really doesn't have any significance as far as
no,
the
but
same
it
thing.
was a catchy name for them.
Nice, right?
But
that's cute.
Really, it's a very dangerous program because what China's
they're
doing,
loan sharks, and if you don't pay up, we're going to break your knees.
Yeah, what they'll do is they give you a lien on their rare earth minerals, and if they can't pay the debts they owe, which they can't because for the most part they didn't ever need the money. They foreclose on those liens and take the rare earth minerals. And it's really a device to promote the foreclosure and to promote those falling under communist direction.
Yeah, that's great.
Let's go to Paul in Queens.
Hey, Paul.
Hi, Mr. Moore. I got a question for you. If we're doing economics, besides, the the fanatics and the communists bringing their students in to convert our free system, but hopefully we could change that. With the banking industry, we have the top banks that keep buying all the small banks out. Why is the Fed still in charge? Why don't we have the small banks in every region take over the Fed and tell them to stop bothering the little banks so you can bring the financial system back up further?
That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and you're absolutely right. The number of banks in the United States has dropped enormously. I think over 100 go out of business every year.
What's the percentage, do you think, that we lost?
What?
The percentage of banks in the U.S. that were dropped out.
Yeah, I don't know, but I know that the number of banks dropped from about 800 to 700 in the last year. And it's a deliberate strategy by the big banks to monopolize banking.
Sure.
The U.S. is one of the only countries that has small banks. For the most part, in most other countries, there's only one bank, which is the government bank. And other countries, there are two or three, but not the hundreds or the thousands that we have in the United States. And there's been a real effort by the major banks working in coordination with the Federal Reserve Board to close down the small banks and give more and more business to the big banks. And that's been a trend over the last 20 or 30 years. And the community bank is going out of business. But thanks for your call. You're absolutely
it was good.
right.
It was great.
Let's go to Charlotte in North Carolina, New Jersey.
Oh, Charlotte, North Carolina, you were thinking of. Hi, Charlotte.
New
from
Jersey.
New Jersey.
Hi, New Jersey. Well, Mr. Morris, I love your show all the time. I'm looking always for you to listen and news and everywhere. And I'd like to point out, last weekend there was so much chaos in Seaside Heights in New Jersey. There was police. They did, there was stabbing. I think the whole New Jersey is a sanctuary state. Now, maybe there's few towns that it's not, but it's so bad. You hear Patterson shooting, always stealing, all that stuff, car stealing, and everywhere. Newark, it's nothing. I mean, it's not a safe place to be around.
No. Gee, I wasn't aware of that. What we need to do there is to deport these people. And Trump's doing that, but apparently they haven't gotten to New Jersey much. But I think that's so important. Thank you for talking about it, and it's very constructive that you did. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Let's go to Bob in Trumbull.
Trumbull, Connecticut?
Yeah.
Hey, Doug and Dick.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, the Chinese have been sending students here for over 30 years. They started with the smaller colleges. I had a client in New Haven who was a Chinese professor who had a couple of houses, and they were all Chinese students that came in. So they've been doing this for years.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that Trump is striking out against these colleges and cutting back on their visas for students to come in is, of course, espionage. But the other thing is these foreign students usually pay full freight. They're usually not scholarship students. So that the university may have, Harvard, for example, has 29% of its student body is foreign. And they get every penny of tuition from those folks. Whereas American students are much more likely to have student loans, Pell Grants, or scholarships from the school, where the school does not make as much money. And that, I think, is the big reason for that.
And when we get back, we're going to talk about Biden's little speech he gave in Delaware the other day.
Okay, good.
All right, when we get back.
The Dick Morris Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dick Morris Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Dick Morris and Doug DePiro Show, sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group.
Dick, listen, we'll get to the Biden speech right after this, but we're going to talk about these e-bikes in New York City. I got to tell you, I ride a motorcycle in New York City all the time, and half the time without a helmet. I know I get yelled at, right? But everyone said, "Oh, you're going to get killed on a motorcycle." No, I get off my bike, I walk across the street, and the guy in the e-bike almost kills me. He runs by like 80 miles. They do like 40 miles an hour. Anyway, they're cracking down. New York City progressive politicians are outraged by the police department's crackdown on the e-bikes, arguing that its new enforcement measures are racist, right, because of an electric bike. Racist because they could result in the loss of licenses or deportation for illegal immigrants delivering drivers or minority. This is unbelievable. This after the NYPD began issuing criminal court summonses last month for e-bike riders who violate standard traffic laws such as running red lights or riding on sidewalks. Let me tell you, if I had a warrant and I get pulled over in my car, the police are going to see that warrant and they're going to do something about it, right? Anyway, NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch defended the crackdown during a Thursday council budget hearing, saying, "This is not a war on e-bikes. This is a response to a very real concern that are widely held across virtually every borough, every New Yorker in the city. Additionally, she explained the enforcement measures were enacted as response to safety concerns from New York and me. I yelled at a bunch of cops saying, 'You got to grab these guys,' because I almost got killed. I can't believe it." Tiffany Cabin, is that how you say it? Tiffany Cabin, a progressive council member, lambasted the commissioner and her colleagues, arguing that police officers are likely not being objective when deciding to target certain hotspots in the Big Apple. "It does not increase public trust in how this is being enforced if you cannot even articulate for me how officers are using this discretion," really, Cabin said, claiming that the fines are likely being weaponized against people of color and could lead to deportations due to the requirement of having to appear in court. "A person who is more likely to be a person of color may end up in deportation proceedings," she said, adding, "It's just not right." Okay. According to the Post, roughly 65,000 delivery drivers, who are often referred to as deliveristas.
I love that.
Rely on high-powered transportation that is easy to maneuver around the city 5 boroughs, while the left-wing
city council members
claim that the law could lead deportation. It's unclear how many illegal immigrants act as delivery drivers. Tisch told the council that increasing enforcement to criminal summonses was necessary because previously enacted civil summons were ineffective. "I call on the council to change the laws," said Tisch, adding that the criminal enforcement measures have been working. During the hearings, Democrat council member Lincoln Ressler, whose Brooklyn district has had documented issues of speeding, e-bikes that have injured community members. I heard of a lot of people getting hit by these bikes, by the way. The e-bikes have injured community members, including young children, shared the same sentiment as his progressive colleague, despite the unlawful activity occurring in the district he represented. "I'm concerned about more people getting swept up in our criminal justice system who don't need it," said Ressler, adding, "We have a Trump administration that is trying to sweep everyone up in the deportation machine." Yeah, okay, whatever.
So in other words, you have these rules that protect civilians and pedestrians, and you don't allow motorists to speed, you don't allow them to drive on the sidewalk, you don't allow them to run the lights. But delivery vehicles are fine. The deliveristas can do it. And the reason that they're not enforcing that is that they're worried that some of these folks might be here illegally.
Well, it's too bad,
and that they might be deported from the country.
Well, there you go.
Well, I think if you're getting swept off the street, there's a good chance that you'll be thrown.
Well, hold on. I think if you're here illegally, you should be more careful the way you drive. How about that?
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So why don't you talk about this Biden thing, Dick?
Yeah. So a major Democratic strategist named
I don't know his name.
Turrentine, I don't know his first name, said that, but an important Democratic operative told Laura Ingraham on Fox News that Biden has been pushed out of the 24 race And one of the ironies is that Donald Trump's poll numbers went down earlier this year, but our poll numbers did not go up. One of the reasons they did not go up, he said, is that we were struggling to move forward and Biden keeps rolling us backwards. And that's what the slogan of the Harris campaign was, always forward, and we're not going backward again.
Couldn't even walk forward.
But clearly Biden was dragging the party back and is dragging it back. And it's good the Democratic strategist is saying that.
Biden said in a speech, a Memorial Day speech, he was very proud of his record prior to dropping out of the race, appearing to suggest President Trump had been last in favorability. While discussing Biden's comments, Fox News' Laura Ingraham told Turrentine that the former president had been pushed out of the race.
Let's hear from Depeche Mode.
Depeche Mode. Hello, Depeche Mode.
That is the new theme song of the Democratic Party. And by putting Biden out there as their spokesman, they're just emphasizing that. I think that the long-term effect of the Democratic credibility, of the exposure of their lies to keep Biden in office and to minimize his dementia and conceal his cancer, are that nobody is going to believe anything the Democrats say anymore.
For a long
It's like
time.
nobody believes ExxonMobil anymore after the oil spill. Nobody believed Richard Nixon or Lyndon Johnson, and now nobody's going to believe the Democratic Party. Understand the magnitude of this deception. They had a president who had cancer, which he'll probably die of, it spread to his bones, and dementia. And they not only covered it up to let him stay in office, but tried to foist on Americans running him for re-election.
And the doctors had said that type of cancer, where he's at right now, had to be for 8 years in the making, or more, that they knew about this. Anyway, Dick Morris, it's been an honor to be here on your
great,
show.
Really, great show.
So, bye-bye. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Rock.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
No. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
No. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Dick Morris Show. You can hear The Dick Morris Show Sundays at noon. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Hello, folks. Larry Kudlow here. Pay attention, because China is leading the largest anti-American alliance since World War II. One that's already dumped U.S. bonds, grabbed 43 million acres of our farmland, and is plotting to dethrone the dollar. That's why IRA and 401k savers are protecting their savings with gold. Please go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908 for your free gold guide on how to protect your wealth with gold 100% tax-free.